Hello and good afternoon and welcome back to the Live Better series. As you know, every week we take a look at how we can live better and we apply the core principles of acceptance and commitment therapy to different challenges in our life like anxiety, depression, relationships. And today's topic is about healthy ways to address loss and grief in our life. So let me say that again, and when I say that, I want you to just think about your own life for a minute, okay? So today we're going to be using the principles of acceptance and commitment therapy to be supportive of you to deal in a healthy way with losses that you've experienced in your life or grief that you have had in your life. Now, as I look out here at the audience, in my experience, which goes back to starting on Skid Row in Detroit in 1973, so that was a few years ago, huh? So really in the thousands of patients that I've worked with over the years, whether they had a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or PTSD or substance abuse or gambling, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, gambling, pathological gambling, as we began to deal with those issues, as someone talked about their depression, their anxiety, their PTSD, their substance abuse, eventually as part of their healing process, what we began to see as these feelings started coming up, and what we saw is there were a lot of unresolved feelings of loss and grief. And that typically people who come into treatment, whether it's outpatient counseling or they come to inpatient at Northern Nevada Adult Mental Health, there's a history of 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years of losses that people have had, and they've not dealt with those losses. They've kind of pushed them underwater like the beach ball we'll be talking about. It's like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with my parents' divorce. I don't want to deal with the death of my brother. I don't want to deal with the fact that I lost my right leg. I don't want to deal with I lost my ability to work. I don't want to deal with the fact that I have this mental illness and it's affected my functioning. I don't want to deal with the fact that because of my substance abuse and my mental illness, I've lost my family and they don't want to have anything to do with me. Or my child who died. Or my grandparent who died, or that I was an Army kid and we moved from town to town to town and I made friends and lost friends and made friends and lost friends, or that because of my mental illness or because of my addiction, I lost 10 or 20 years of my life where I was just out there. I lost that time, it seems like, huh? So for all of these patients that I've worked with, at some point in time for them to continue to get well, they needed to deal with their losses and they needed to deal with their grief. They needed to deal with the divorce, the loss of the kids, the death, the loss of the career, which means they needed to do grief work. They needed to begin to be willing to encounter feelings that we would rather not feel, like sadness, hurt, loss, confusion, disillusionment, cynicism. However, the good news is, and we're going to talk about that, when we allow ourselves to feel those things, it passes and life starts to get better. One of the things that so many patients that I've worked with, they said, this has really kept me sick, hasn't it? I said, yes, it has. They said, not dealing with what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that's kept me depressed or anxious. That's been part of my relapse with alcohol or drugs or gambling, hasn't it? And I said, yes, it has been. Yes, it has been. And so we agreed that part of the healing process was going to be engaging in this grief and loss process. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, you guys. It's about, like all of our classes, it's about living better. It's about getting better. It's about being healthy. And of course, a key theme on our handouts, every week we talk about this, that I can live a vital and meaningful life. Huh? So a vital life is one where energy is flowing through us. And a meaningful life is a life where I know my life has purpose and meaning. So I want to share this with you, that part of living a vital and meaningful life is to love and to be engaged. And if we love, that person will eventually either leave us or die, and we will feel terrible. If we're living a meaningful life, we will experience loss or change. We'll lose a job or lose a career or we lose different things in our life. We go through times where we lose our sense of meaning. So if we are going to be vital and alive, to be alive means we are going to experience change. We are going to experience loss. So this is where we have to say, all the chips are in on the table. I'm all in. I'm all in for the good, the bad, or the ugly. Sometimes because we've experienced loss, we begin to shy away from life. We hide under the covers. We don't get engaged. We just stay in our apartment. We drink our brains out. We smoke dope. We try to separate ourselves from life. But in recovery, we're out there and we're saying yes to life, which means we're going to experience some great, beautiful, wonderful things. And when we experience great, beautiful, wonderful things, we will also experience change and loss and grief. You can't have one without the other, can you guys? They go together. So it takes courage to say yes to life, doesn't it? So I just talked then about the impact of unresolved grief and loss. That if we've been hiding under the covers or pushing it under the beach ball all these years, part of your recovery is going to be let these thoughts and feelings come up. Feel the hurt, have a good cry, feel the sadness, feel the loneliness, feel the anger. Feel that and it'll pass. It passes. And then the sun comes out and we go on with our lives. This is within the context of our little image that captures what acceptance and commitment therapy is all about. And the bluebird is, yes, I can live a vital and meaningful life. And to do that, that's where the new pair of glasses comes in, huh? The new pair of glasses. I realize I need to change my perspective on life. I need to put on a new pair of glasses and begin to look at grief and loss in a new way. I have to be willing to experience it instead of try to run away from it. Then there's the Chinese finger trap, huh? Which means I need to accept my feelings the way they are. I need to accept myself and life the way it is. Which means we let the beach ball come up. We let the beach ball come up. We let our thoughts and feelings that we've been pushing them underwater all these years, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, we let it come up and feel the feelings of what it was like to be a little kid and mom and dad got divorced, or one of our parents died, or a brother or sister died, or our best girlfriend when we were 18 years old left us, or boyfriend, or to feel those feelings that we've run away from all these years, and then to focus on 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 means what's really important to me? What kind of a person do I want to be? And how do I want to live my life? To focus on that and move forward. So, as we're doing this, you'll remember the first part, those of you that have seen that in the other classes. The first part of that act mindfully meditation, where we just kind of close our eyes and we let our thoughts and feelings come up. And we take a few deep breaths. Why don't you do that right now, okay? Just go ahead and close your eyes and take a couple of deep breaths. And let your thoughts and feelings come up. Now, it would not be unusual, since we're talking about grief and loss, that a lot of losses might be running through your mind right now. And a healthy thing for you to do as they're coming up during this class, you guys, is let them be there. Let them be there and apply this information to those losses. Don't push it underwater and say, I'm not going to deal with this. Let it come up and say, let me deal with this information that we're going to talk about in the class. So let's go ahead And you can see in this first dark paragraph here, there's some good information. And one of the things it says is that grief and loss are part of life. No one escapes loss. No one escapes grief. It can be really difficult to deal with it. Our culture, in a lot of ways, does not know how to deal with grief. People will say, you should be over that, or he's in a better place, or she's in a better place, or you didn't really want that job anyway, or you don't want a career, and people will try, they don't know exactly how to be with us or allow us to grieve our losses. The word grief comes from a word that means to carry a heavy burden, When we're grieving, we're carrying a heavy burden. And so, one of the things that we want to do is we want to acknowledge, I have a heavy burden right now because of the loss of my dad or my mom or my son or my daughter, my spouse, my health. It's a heavy burden. That's where we start off. Speaking reality, saying the way it really is. This is really heavy. This is really heavy. This is hard to deal with. That's where we start. Now, the other thing, two other things that we talk about here then is to realize that grieving is a process. So many people that I've counseled a week later after a loss, after a change, after a death, or even 6 months later, they'll say, I should be over this. I should be over this. And I'll tell them, I said, no, you should not be over it. This takes time. You can't lose a spouse that you've been with for 20 years. You can't lose your health to a chronic illness. You can't lose a child. You can't lose your ability to work or other changes and get over that in 6 months. It's one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. And it's not unusual that it takes a year, year and a half, or 2 years to begin to heal up. But I will say this too, one of the things that we realize is in grieving, there are some things we never really get over. So grieving is not about getting over anything. It's about healing up and saying yes to life. But as so many parents have shared with me who have worked real hard in therapy for a couple of years, and they've said, I will never get over my daughter dying. That will always be a part of my life. And I said, you're sure right. But it's a matter of healing up and moving on with our life. The other thing, you'll see this really cool word, it's called a crucible. And a crucible means, that goes back to the Middle Ages when they used to put gold through the fire and it would burn out the impurities and it would come out on the other end pure gold. That's what happens to us as human beings. When we're grieving, we go through the fire, we go through the crucible experience, but we come out wiser and stronger and leading more meaningful lives on the other end of that when we allow ourselves to do that. So while I'm talking about allowing and encountering pain, the good news is the sun does come out tomorrow. When we go through this, we're wiser, we're more compassionate, and actually we have more joy in our life. So let's take a look at the bottom. You'll see there's a list there. What changes or grief have you experienced, let's say in the last 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years? Has there been a death of a family member or a friend or an associate or a pet? Has there been a tragedy in your life? Has there been murder or suicide, an accident, a traumatic event, or something else that was just a shock to your system? Have there been changes in your life like moving, starting a marriage, ending a marriage, starting school, graduating from school, changing jobs, not being able to work, financial changes, legal problems, changes in your family life, people getting married, people moving away, people getting divorced? Has there been estrangement where people won't talk to each other? Or has there been a chronic illness? Do you have an illness or someone in your family have a chronic illness that has taken away part of their functioning. So as we go through that list, you guys, when that happens, it's a shock to our system. We begin to feel loss. We begin to feel grief. And again, instead of pushing that beach ball underwater, we want to let it come up and say, that hurts. That loss, that change, that death, that suicide, that illness, that divorce, having to move away from all my friends, that hurts. I feel lost, etc. We're going to talk about the feelings that come up in just a minute. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at those now at the top of the next page. What are some normal reactions? And again, I can't stress this enough, you guys, because again, in our society frequently, when people are grieving, we tend to think there's something pathological about it, which means sick. No, being in the grieving process is not pathological, it's normal. So what are some of the normal things? And I'm asking you to circle some of these things that have happened with you in the last couple of years. It's normal when we have a loss that first of all, we feel numb. That we feel numb. We feel unreality. We can't believe it. We can't believe that diagnosis. We can't believe it when the doctor says you'll never work again. We can't believe it when we get a call from the emergency room and they say, you need to come down here, your family member is dying. Or when our spouse tells us, I don't love you anymore, I'm divorcing you. Do you see that, you guys? There's like numbness. It's like, what? A feeling of unreality. It's hard to believe. Then, as we continue on in the cycle, of course, we're going to feel sad. That's normal. We're going to feel hurt. We're going to feel lost. We're going to feel like things don't make sense. I can't believe it. Like so many people will tell me when they've lost someone close to them, the phone rings and they pick it up and they think it's mom. It's mom calling me. It's dad calling me. And then it hits them. It's like, no, they're not calling anymore. I can't believe it. It's been a year and I still think it's mom calling. That's normal. Sometimes we have a loss of appetite. We don't feel like eating. It's not unusual when we're going through losses that we have a hard time with sleeping. Some of us have insomnia, which means we have a hard time falling asleep. Or we have a hard time, we might fall asleep for 2 or 3 hours, but then we wake up and we can't go back to sleep. That's called insomnia. Some of us suffer from hypersomnia, where we just want to hide under the covers. We want to sleep like 14, 16, 18, 20 hours a day. We just do not want to be a part of life. It's very common that we have anger, that we have rage, that we're very irritable, we're really hard to be around. It's very common that we feel guilty. Oh, if I would have only done this, or if I would have done that. If I would have done that, that wouldn't have happened. If I would have told her to stop drinking or take your meds, or we would have gone to marriage and family therapy, or if we would have. And so we feel guilty. Now, right along with guilt, where we are mad at ourselves, it's not unusual we start blaming other people too, huh? Well, it was her dad or her mom, or it was the doctor, it was the nurse, it was the attorney, it was her employer, it was her kids, it was the stepkids, it was the bad boss, so we feel like we want to blame somebody. That's natural and that's normal. And again, as you see me going through this, you guys, that's why it's so good to have a therapist to talk to. It's also why it might be good to be in a grief group, to have people to talk to. Because again, grief is a heavy burden. And there is that really great cliche in recovery. You alone can do it, but you don't have to do it alone. So if you're going through this right now, please get a therapist or join a grief group and have people to talk to about this. It's not unusual that for a certain period of time, that person is always on our mind. That's why employers know that if someone has had a death or a gigantic loss in their family, their productivity goes down because they're not able to concentrate. They're not able to focus very well. Their stamina really goes down. And a humane employer cuts some slack for somebody when they're going through a difficult time like that. And as family members, we want to know that too. So I already mentioned confusion. We also could sink into depression. I do want to mention too, there's such a thing as complicated grief. And complicated grief means we experience a loss or a death, and we have to work through that. But the other thing is, maybe we had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other losses that we've never dealt with. We always ran away from them. We pushed the beach ball underwater. We drank or we took drugs to not deal with it. So now we're in recovery. Not only are we dealing with this loss, but we've got 2 or 3 or 4 other losses. So that's why it feels so darn overwhelming, huh? It's not just this loss, it's all these other ones too. That's why at a time of grief and loss, it's a really edgy time for relapse. Either relapse with mental illness or relapse with alcohol or drugs. So we want to be very careful and take good care of ourselves. We can also begin to question, what is the meaning of my life now? And for a lot of people, it's also a spiritual crisis. It brings up issues about, why did God do this to my loved one? Why did God do this to me? Why did God do this to us? And those are questions that, or life, or the higher power, or however way we conceptualize the cosmos. We want to know, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to us? And again, this is why it's good to have a therapist, or it's good to be in a group, to not have to carry this heavy burden by ourselves. So I hope that made sense to you, that these feelings, these reactions are normal, and you alone can do it, but you don't have to do it alone. Now, let's go ahead and spend some time taking a look from the perspective of acceptance and commitment therapy. What are some positive things we can do? What are some healthy things we can do to help ourselves grow through this time of grief and loss and develop to become even wiser and more compassionate? And like Nietzsche said, Nietzsche said, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. Dealing with loss can make us stronger. So let's go ahead and take a look. And this is from a really wonderful ACT therapist. His name is Dr. Russ Smith. He's from Australia, New Zealand, down that area. And you can see I've got the website right there. You can click on the website and get his article if you want. But let's go ahead, and what does Dr. Harris have to say? This has to go back to the beach ball, huh? Number 1, accept we're feeling whatever we're feeling. Accept that we're feeling whatever we're feeling. We want to notice the feeling. So again, just like we've talked about up here with our ACT paradigm, huh? Just like with the ACT paradigm, let that feeling come up, even though it's scary and it's terrifying. And a lot of us who knew in recovery in the first couple of years, we've spent our whole life running away from our feelings, haven't we? We thought these feelings were our enemies. But actually, these feelings are our friends, and it's a passageway. Feeling these feelings is a passageway into a new life. So feeling the fear, feeling the sadness, feeling the hurt, having a good cry, even if you're a big, tough guy, having a good cry, that's part of the healing process, to feel those feelings. Number 2, accept at times this is a big deal, and at times we're going to feel overwhelmed. And again, that's why it's good to have a friend, a sponsor, a therapist, or a group, and to say, you know what, I'm wiped out, you guys. I'm overwhelmed. I'm confused. I don't know up from down. I got all these feelings. I feel like drinking or using. I feel like just running away. This is overwhelming me. I've lost my little girl. I've lost my little boy. Number 3, we want to have an anchor. What can you hold on to? What can you hold on to? Again, this is where mindfulness can be helpful, where we're used to dealing with our feelings and not having to run away from them. Also, sometimes, again, having someone close to us to whom we're grounded and we can talk to. Also, for people that have a particular spiritual belief, sometimes prayer can help. A lot of people, prayer helps them in their times of grief. Number 4, we talked about that up here too, remember? Connect with our values, where we say, okay, I'm going through a hard time right now, but what are my values? What kind of person do I want to be? Well, I'm not the only one in my family who's grieving. I know my wife is too. I want to show up for her. Or the kids are too. I want to show up for them. Or our coworkers, like if there's been violence in the workplace. So I want to show up for my coworkers too. Or if there's been a suicide in our recovery group, I want to show up for my other friends in recovery. So connecting with our values, or, even though I feel bad, they're counting on me to do that volunteer work at the senior center, or they're counting on me to show up at NAMS and volunteer. So that's a value of mine. I'm going to do that. Another value of mine is to stay healthy. So I'm going to do my best to take my medications, stay clean and sober, get a good night's rest, eat a healthy meal. Even when I don't feel like it, those are my values. I'm committed to doing that. Number 5, and this is really important. This has to do with our mind and how our mind, if we believe in some of these stories, you guys, it can really take us down a path out of recovery and into kind of like a living hell. So by stories, what I mean is things that we tell ourselves that aren't true. But if we're telling ourselves stories and they're not true, but we believe them, all of a sudden then we believe that they're true. And then we start living our life based on these stories, like my life is all over now. My wife said she wanted to divorce me. My life is all over now. Well, if someone believed that story, they would think that their life was all over, huh? So we want to be aware of those stories and say, you know what? I'm practicing my mindfulness, and I know that's my mind just telling me that. My life isn't over. And again, this is why it's so good to be in a group or have a therapist to speak to. Or we could say, like if our son or our daughter is involved in a terrible automobile accident and they lose both of their legs, we can say, oh, she'll never get over this. He'll never get over that. And if we live our lives that way, and if we communicate to our son or daughter, you'll never get over this, well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? They won't get over it. So we want to catch ourselves and say, wait a minute, that's my mind telling me stories again. I don't want to believe that. Or if we tell ourselves, I can't bear this. Or if we say it's all my fault. Or I should have done something about this. If I would have done something, this wouldn't have happened. See, these are stories that lead us into depression and lead us into anxiety and lead us back into relapse. And our own thoughts of giving up on life. Number 6, to remember that living a vital life, if we're going to live a vital life, which means we love life and we love people. When we're engaged in life and we love people, we will experience change, we will experience loss, we will experience grief. And we need to know that if we're going to experience the beautiful, we need to be willing to experience the painful. And the other thing is, if we don't experience the painful and we shut ourselves off from that, we will also shut ourselves off from the beautiful. In other words, we'll be walking dead. We'll be numb. We'll be zoned out. So number 6 says, find vitality in our pain. And say, as bad as this hurts, it's better than never having loved someone. or it's better than never having tried. I'd rather feel this than to have said no from life and copped out. Number 7, we want to ask ourselves, how can I grow from this experience? Again, going back to whatever that grief is or whatever that loss is that you experience. How can I grow from this? Can I be a better parent? Can I be a more loving spouse or a more loving child? Can I do a better job with my work or my volunteer work? Can I be a more productive or creative member of my community? Can I be a better grandparent, a more loving grandparent? Like I was talking with someone who said, I kind of blew it as a parent. So right now, I'm doing my best to be a really good grandparent. So see, they learned something from that experience, huh? Number 8, sometimes having a little ritual can help. Again, some people say a rosary. Catholics go to a church and light a candle. Other types of people, they light candles. They put messages in helium balloons and send them off into the cosmos. Some people go to Mass. Some people go to other religious ceremonies. What ritual can help you deal with this terrible sense of loss that you're feeling? Number 10, it's a reminder to us, you guys, that grieving, for the first year especially, takes a lot of energy. So when we're grieving, we want to be gentle and kind with ourselves. We don't want to push ourselves to do too much. We might find ourselves saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can't volunteer here. I can't babysit here. I can't work an extra shift. I can't sponsor you. I can't do all these things right now. We need to give ourselves time to heal. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. So on one hand, like we've talked about, we don't want to withdraw and hide under the covers, right? But also, we don't want to be so out there that we burn ourselves out and we use up all of our energy and we end up relapsing anyway because we've got no energy anymore, huh? And then number 11 is, in the midst of this grief and loss, first of all, being grateful for that person in our lives, for the time we had together, for that job we had, for when we were healthy and we could run or we could play pool or we could bicycle or we could do things that maybe we can't do now. We can appreciate those times and say, you know what? That person or these experiences have been taken from me, but you know what? At least I had those experiences and I'm grateful for those. And then the other thing we can do is we can look around and we can say, excuse me, who else or what else is in my life? That would be our typical gratitude list, huh? To make a gratitude list and say, yes, well, I still have my daughter or my grandson. Or I may not be able to bicycle 75 miles, but I can still go for a 1-mile walk along the river. I may not be able to work full-time, but I can work part-time, or I can do volunteer work and help people in a meaningful way. So make a list of what we still can do. And then you'll see down at the end, there are a couple of really good quotes. Let's take a minute to look at those. And you'll see the first one is from Abraham Lincoln. And he says, in this odd world of ours, sorrow comes to everyone. Perfect relief is not possible except with time. You cannot now believe that you'll ever feel better. Those of us that maybe right now are in the midst of grief or we've gone through grief, we know that's true, huh? When we're in the middle of that grief, we feel like it's never going to get better. We're never going to get over it. But Abraham Lincoln says that's not true. You are sure to be happy again. Knowing this, truly believing this, will make us less miserable now. And then he says, you know, I've had enough experience with this to know what I'm talking about, huh? And of course, those of us that know Lincoln's story, we know he experienced terrible loss in his life. And then this is a great quote from the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy, Dr. Steve Hayes. And Dr. Hayes says, human beings demonstrate enormous courage and deep compassion. Knowing they can be hurt, humans still love others. Knowing they can die, humans still care about the future. Facing the draw of meaninglessness, human beings still embrace ideals. And so both Abraham Lincoln and Dr. Steve Hayes, in their own way, what they're doing, they're paraphrasing Dr. Viktor Frankl when Dr. Frankl said, say yes to life in spite of everything, huh? No matter what happens, say yes to life in spite of everything and keep going on. And there are people that I've worked with in their grief, and they've said, I feel like giving up, but in honor of my spouse or my son or my daughter or my dad or my mom, I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to live the best life I can live. So say yes to life in spite of everything. Now, as we're wrapping up, we've gone through a lot of information today. We've talked about the ACT paradigm. We've talked about those feelings of grief that are normal. We've talked about those 11 principles from ACT therapy that we can use to help us deal with this really difficult time. And so as we're wrapping up, I hope each one of you has picked out one thing that you can use in your life, where you've said, you know what, I am going through some grief and loss right now, and I can use this to make my life better. So again, as we're wrapping up, I hope each one of you is leaving here with one thing that will make your life better. It's always great being with you. Take good care of yourselves. Thank you very much.